The morning my brother walked into my flower studio was a pair of bolt cutters and a rental van. He filmed every single second of it and uploaded the video before I had finished my first coffee of the day. I found out the way most people find out about terrible things now, through my phone. A text from my wholesale supplier, Nadia, who had seen it shared in a local business owners group on Facebook. Then a text from my friend Yuki, who runs a ceramic shop 2 doors down from mine on Harvard Street. Then 3 more from people I had not spoken to in months. By the time I looked at the actual video, it already had over 600 shares. I want to explain what Petal and Root meant before I explain what my brother did to it, because one without the other is just a story about property damage, and this is not that kind of story. I opened the studio 4 years ago, in the spring, when I was 29 years old and had spent the previous 7 years working as a project coordinator for a mid-sized logistics firm in Mississauga. The work was stable and beige and paid me well enough that I had been able to save, carefully and without much joy, a little over $68,000. I did not spend that money on a vacation or a car upgrade or a condo. I spent it on a narrow-fronted commercial space on Harvard Street in Toronto, a second-hand commercial cooler I drove 4 hours to pick up in Kingston, a used van I repainted myself in a parking lot in Scarborough over 2 weekends, and approximately $4,000 worth of tools, shelving, and supplies I sourced from liquidation sales, estate auctions, and one very useful connection I had made through a community gardening group in my neighborhood. I named it Petal and Root because both words meant something literal and true to me. Petal for what you see, root for what holds it up. I had spent my whole adult life being interested in what held things up. By the second year, I had 3 wholesale accounts with restaurants along Dundas West. By the third year, a lifestyle publication out of Hamilton had called Petal and Root one of the most considered small flower studios in the province. By the fourth year, I had a part-time employee named Celia, who had 2 kids in elementary school and depended on her hours there, and a waiting list for my dried arrangement workshops that ran 8 weeks long. My brother Lachlan had visited the studio once, shortly after I opened. He looked around for about 4 minutes, asked if I had anything to drink other than water, and left. He sent me a text later that said cute. That was his review. Our family had a way of distributing resources that looked, from the outside, like generosity. My parents, Frank and Barbara, had 2 children. I was the older one who moved out at 22 on a student loan I paid back myself and did not call home to ask for much. Lachlan was the younger one who had, over the course of his adult life, received a series of financial arrangements from my parents that I did not know the full scope of until much later. He had borrowed money for a truck he no longer owned. My parents had covered the balance on a line of credit, somewhere in the range of $18,000, when he went through a period he described as transitional. They had co-signed his apartment lease twice. When his second lease fell through because of an incident with a neighbor that resulted in a noise complaint and an eviction notice, they had allowed him to move back into the house on Birchview Crescent in Burlington, where they had lived for 22 years and where, I would later learn, they had taken out a home equity line of credit to fund most of what I've just described. I did not know about the equity line. I had no reason to know. When I needed a cosigner for my initial business loan, my father told me he preferred not to take on that kind of exposure. I found a different route. I assumed that was just where we all stood. What I did not know was that the agreement my father had signed when he opened the line of credit with his lender, a regional bank called Meridian Credit Union, which has a strong presence across Ontario, contained a covenant clause that would become relevant in a way none of us had anticipated. Least of all Lachlan. But I am getting ahead of myself. 11 months before the bolt cutters, Lachlan came to Petal and Root on a Tuesday morning without calling ahead. He arrived at 9:50 when I was in the middle of a wholesale order for a restaurant client, and he told me he was starting a business, a furniture resale operation, vintage and mid-century pieces, sourced from estate sales, flipped for a margin. He had a name picked out. He wanted to use my studio as a storage and staging space 3 days a week. He named a number that was roughly a third of what I would have charged anyone else, and he framed it as a favor he was doing me. The extra foot traffic, the visibility, the connections he would bring. I looked at my cooler, which I had driven to Kingston to retrieve. I looked at the shelving I had built myself from reclaimed pine boards on a February weekend with a circular saw I had borrowed from my neighbor and returned with a thank you note and a plant. Then I told my brother that it did not work for me. He looked around the studio the way he had looked around it the first time, like it was a temporary arrangement, something I was playing at. Then he said, very casually, that Dad knew my landlord do the Rotary Club. He said it as information, ambient and neighborly, not as what it actually was. I told him to leave. He left without argument. He left the way someone leaves when they have simply noted your address and your hours. The video went up on a Saturday morning at 7:43. I know the time because Nadia's text came in at 7:51 and I checked my phone immediately, thinking it was a supplier issue. The video was 8 minutes and 20 seconds long. Lachlan had filmed himself from the moment he arrived. He had a key. Not a copy he had made without permission, but the actual spare key that had lived on a hook inside my parents' back door for 2 years because I had left it there during a visit and thought, without much examination of that thought, that this was what family was for. You left a key. They held it. It was ordinary and boring, and it was also, as it turned out, the detail that would change everything. In the video, he used the bolt cutters on the interior padlock I had added to the storage room the previous year. He loaded 12 of my workshop supply crates into the rental van. He pulled the commercial cooler away from the wall far enough that the drain line disconnected, which meant everything in the cooler, an entire week's worth of inventory including 30 stems of peonies I had sourced from a grower in Niagara-on-the-Lake, was a loss. He knocked over the shelving unit along the left wall. He picked up the hand-painted sign Yuki had made for me as a studio warming gift and looked at it on camera for a moment, and then set it face down on the floor. The caption he wrote was, "Rent is due, sis." Cute place, though. He had posted it to his personal Facebook and to a local Buy Nothing group. The shares moved fast. I was standing in my kitchen in my bathrobe when I watched it. I did not throw my phone. I did not cry. I set the phone down on the counter, very deliberately, and I stood there for a moment with my hands flat on the laminate and I thought about what I needed to do in the correct order. The first call was to the non-emergency police line. The officer I spoke to told me to document everything before touching anything and asked if I knew the individual in the video. I told him it was my brother. There was a brief pause. He said someone would be by within the hour. The second call was to a woman named Constance Webb, who was a civil litigation attorney I had been introduced to through a former client of mine who ran a small import business out of Kensington Market. Constance was not a friend. She was something more useful than a friend. She answered on the third ring and I told her what had happened and she said, "Send me the video and send me your lease, and don't touch anything until I've read both." I had negotiated my commercial lease carefully. I had spent 11 days going through it before signing, working through the language with a contracts attorney my accountant had recommended. I had asked for several provisions that were not in the standard form. One of them was Section 7.4. Constance read it in under 6 minutes. Then she said, "Who has your spare key and how did they get it?" I told her about the hook at my parents' house, about Lachlan, about the Rotary Club comment, and the Tuesday morning visit 11 months ago. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "This clause creates third-party liability for any party who grants access, expressly or through implied authorization, to an individual who causes damage to the commercial premises. It's a joint and several provision. It is written broadly. And your brother used a key that was kept at a residential address belonging to your parents. Did you give them that key knowingly for safekeeping?" I told her I had. She said, "That is implied authorization. And if your parents knew your brother had access to it and did not restrict that access, they may meet the threshold under this clause. I'll need to research their property situation. Give me 72 hours. The damage assessment came back at $81,400. That figure covered the structural damage to the storage room interior, the cooler repair and lost inventory, the shelving replacement, and a portion of the lost revenue from the workshop series I had to cancel because the supply crates were gone. Celia was out of income for 3 weeks while I waited for the insurance adjuster and the police report. Celia, who had 2 kids and a bus pass and who had texted me the morning after asking if she still had a job with a level of careful politeness that is the most painful kind of question to receive. I told her yes, and I processed her pay out of my personal account for those 3 weeks. My brother's attorney, a man named Russell, who called me on a Thursday afternoon with the ease of someone who had not yet looked at Section 7.4, opened the conversation by suggesting we resolve this informally, given that it was a family matter. I let him finish. Then I asked him to pull up my commercial lease and read Section 7.4 aloud to me. The silence that followed had a particular quality. He said he would need to review the full document. I told him to take his time. Constance had already filed, not only against Lachlan, but against my parents as the parties who had maintained the key and through that maintenance provided the access pathway. What she had found in her research was that the home equity line on Birchview Crescent carried its own covenant. Any active civil claim exceeding $50,000 filed against the primary borrowers triggered a mandatory account review by the lender. My claim was $81,400. Meridian received notice of the filing the same week. My father called on a Wednesday evening. He was not composed. He said I was making a mountain out of this. He said I was making a mountain out of this. He said Lachlan had made a mistake. I said Lachlan had filmed the mistake, uploaded it with a caption, and shared it to a public Facebook group and the local Buy Nothing page before I had finished my first coffee. I said there is a difference between a mistake and a position. He said several more things, and I listened to all of them, and then I said, very evenly, that I was not going to withdraw the claim. My mother called the next morning. She started with the tone she uses when she is trying to sound calm, but has been up since 4. She said she hoped I understood what this meant for them, for the house, for everything they had built. I told her I understood it very well. I said I also understood what the studio had meant and what it had cost me to build it. And I said I remembered that when I needed a cosigner 7 years ago, Dad had preferred not to attach his name to business debt, which was fine. I had found another way. But I said it gently. I said it because it was true and because there is a kind of precision that is not cruelty. It is just accuracy. Lachlan called once. He did not apologize. He said he had not thought it would go this far. I told him I believed him and that this was the part he should think about most carefully. Not that he had done it, but that he had not thought. Then I ended the call. Meridian completed their balance review in 31 days. They did not call the equity line immediately. Under the terms, a final judgment was required for that. But they notified my parents that the filed claim created sufficient exposure to trigger a collateral review, and that within 60 days they would need to either post additional security or accept a renegotiation of the line at a substantially higher rate. My parents did not have the additional security available in liquid form. The settlement was reached without going to trial. Russell, who had by then clearly read Section 7.4 more than once, negotiated a final figure of $73,000, structured over 24 months, with my parents named as co-obligors on a personal guarantee. The filed claim against their property was held pending full payment. The criminal matter moved separately. The police had the video. It was 8 minutes and 20 seconds long. His face was visible throughout. The caption was attached. There was not much to argue about. Lachlan received the conditional discharge with 18 months of probation and 240 hours of community service. He also received a civil record that will follow him when he applies for business licenses, which he apparently intends to do because the furniture resale idea has not been abandoned. I reopened Petal and Root on a Thursday morning in early autumn. Yuki came at 8 with coffee from the Portuguese bakery on the corner. She put the hand-painted sign back on the wall. Lachlan had set it face down but had not damaged it and did not make a production of it. Celia arrived at 8:30 and got straight to work on an order that had come in while we were closed. There was nothing ceremonial about it. The cooler was running. The inventory was restocked. The shelving along the left wall was new pine, actually cleaner than the original. My parents have my phone number, and I have theirs. No one has called. We are present in each other's lives the way two weather systems can exist in the same province, overlapping on a map, no longer in contact. I do not know if this is permanent. I have stopped trying to calculate the answer. Lachlan deleted the video 4 days after posting it. The internet had already saved it in multiple places. The local business owners group still references it occasionally when the topic of commercial security comes up. I have been tagged in those posts more than once. Paddle and Root is open 5 days a week. Last quarter was the strongest revenue period since I opened. Celia got a raise. The dried arrangement workshops are booked out 10 weeks in advance. The peonies, when they come back into season from the Niagara grower, are the first thing I order. The hand-painted sign that Yuki made is still on the wall. Lachlan looked at it on camera for a moment before he set it down. I have thought about that moment more than I expected to. What do you see when you look at something someone built and your first instinct is to put it face down on the floor? I don't have an answer to that. I'm not sure the answer would help me. What I keep coming back to is something simpler. When you build something from the ground up, with your own savings, your own labor, your own Saturday mornings, and your own borrowed tools and your own learning as you go, it is not abstract. It is not a concept. It is the specific weight of a commercial cooler in a rented van on a highway outside Kingston at 2 in the afternoon. It is the smell of cut pine on a February weekend. It is knowing which wall catches the afternoon light and building the shelving on that wall on purpose. My brother called it cute. He called it rent as due, sis. I called it mine and I didn't let it go, and I am not sorry about that even a little. The question I keep returning to is not whether I was right to hold the line. I know the answer to that. The question is this: do you know, right now, who has a key to something you built? And do they understand what they are actually holding?